Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, October 10th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, the U.S. scrambles to get more arms to Israel. So before I start on this topic, I want to correct one thing that I said yesterday that was wrong. I accidentally said at one point that over 100,000 people were killed in the Hamas-Israel fighting and the bombing of Gaza. I meant to say over 1,000. Clearly, the casualties are not as bad as 100,000. I didn't pick it up when I re-listened, so I hope I didn't confuse too many people there. But the casualties I'll get into in the next story. It's about 1,600 right now, so a very horrific number, but not as bad as 100,000. All right, so to get started on this story, as Israel has declared a complete siege on Gaza in response to the Hamas attack on southern Israel, the U.S. is scrambling to get more weapons in the hands of the Israelis. So according to the Washington Post, one thing that the Biden administration is considering is combining its request for more spending on the war in Ukraine with new aid for Israel. And the idea, according to the Washington Post's sources, would be to jam the far right. So they're referring to the Republicans in Congress who oppose the proxy war in Ukraine, but are staunch Israel supporters. So no final decision has been made on whether or not Biden's going to do this. And in the meantime, the U.S. is already shipping new weapons to Israel using existing authorities. So a Pentagon official told Politico on Monday that planes carrying new military aid for Israel have already taken off. So the U.S. is sending air defense and munitions. The Pentagon officials have not detailed what kind of weapons they're sending over there, but according to media reports, Israel has requested precision-guided munitions, small diameter bombs, and interceptors for its Iron Dome missile defense system. So Israel already receives $3.8 billion from the U.S. each year in military aid, and that includes $500 million to fund air defense development and $3.3 billion for foreign military financing, which is a program that gives foreign governments money to buy U.S. weapons. So these two types of aid, neither of them allow the U.S. to just ship weapons straight from their own stockpiles. But according to this Politico report and some other reports I saw, apparently the U.S. has $100 million available for Israel using the Presidential Drawdown Authority, which does allow transfers from military stockpiles. It's the primary way the U.S. has been arming Ukraine. So I wasn't aware of that. I guess maybe that's kind of a backup funds. At the same time, I'm sure if they wanted to, if they're determined to arm Israel, they would figure out a way that they can do it, whether or not they had the authorization to. But the Pentagon is working to determine what weapons in the U.S. stockpile that could be made available, and is also pressing the arms industry to expedite deliveries of weapons that Israel has already purchased. The effort comes as the U.S. is expecting Israel to launch a ground invasion of Gaza, which will incur a huge amount of civilian casualties. So they're going to back this expected invasion of Gaza. Israel could start to compete with Ukraine for the types of weapons that it needs from the U.S. So right now, Israel is focusing on pounding Gaza with airstrikes, which requires munitions, for their F-16 fighter jets and things that Ukraine isn't using. But if they do launch this ground assault, they're expected to need 155 millimeter artillery rounds, which are in short supply since the U.S. has poured millions of shells into Ukraine. And I know the U.S. has a stash of artillery shells in Israel, and they have even dipped into that to arm Ukraine. So U.S. Army Secretary Christine Wormuth, she is calling on Congress to approve additional funding to ensure that the U.S. can sustain both wars, both the war in Gaza and the war in Ukraine. She said, quote, "One thing that is really important in terms of the munitions in particular and our ability to support both the Israelis and the Ukrainians simultaneously is additional funding from Congress to be able to increase our capacity in terms of our capacity to expand production and then to also pay for the munitions themselves, end quote. So she's not just talking about money to send weapons, also money to increase weapons production. So it's part of this long-term planning. So Congress is not expected to authorize more spending on Ukraine or Israel until a new House Speaker is elected, which is expected to happen at some point this week. So I saw a quote from Michael McCaul again. He's the head of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Republican from Texas. He was quoted by The Messenger saying that Congress is discussing a massive military aid package, not only for Ukraine and Israel, but for Taiwan as well. So he wants to roll all three, Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. And Taiwan just started receiving military aid from the U.S. The U.S. has always sold weapons to Taiwan since the U.S. and China established relations in 1979, which required the U.S. to sever relations with Taiwan. They always sold them weapons after that, but they never provided them military aid like this, like they have now. So that's really angered China. So it's like three proxy wars, in one bill that he wants to pass. It's just bad news. All right, so the next one here, Israel announces a complete siege of Gaza. So the Israeli defense minister on Monday announced a complete siege on Gaza and said that Israeli forces were fighting human animals as Israeli strikes have been bombarding the enclave, which is home to about 1 million children. That's the reality in Gaza. Population of over 2 million, about half are children. So Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said, quote, "I have ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip. There will be no electricity, no food, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals and we are acting accordingly," end quote. And I got that quote from the Times of Israel. So also on Monday, Hamas warned that it would start executing Israeli captives that it has taken into Gaza if Israel does not stop its airstrikes. According to Middle East Eye, Abu Ubaidah, who's a spokesman for the Hamas, the military wing of Hamas, said that the prisoners were currently safe and sound, but that they are being forced to act due to Israel's airstrikes on civilians. He said that if the bombings did not stop, prisoners would be executed and they would be documented, the executions, meaning they would probably be filmed. So since Hamas launched an unprecedented attack on southern Israel on Saturday, so this is the death toll as of early Monday morning in Israel and Gaza, 1,600 people have been killed on both sides, including 900 Israelis and 700 Palestinians. So in just 3 days, that's a huge number, 1,600. And it's probably more than that at this point. There's been Israeli airstrikes on Gaza just going on throughout the night. They're not counting. They haven't counted everybody yet. And President Biden said on Monday that 11 Americans were among the dead and that he believes others may have been captured. So, as I covered yesterday, an Israeli military spokesman said that about 100,000 troops are amassed in southern Israel waiting to execute their orders, which includes making sure Hamas will not be able to govern the Gaza Strip. So that sounds like some sort of regime change plan. But we'll see what happens in the coming days. Again, U.S. officials were saying on Sunday they expect an invasion within 24 to 48 hours. And it's going to be brutal. It already is very brutal, everything that's been going on. And lots of airstrikes in the Gaza Strip on apartment buildings, towers being leveled, just really horrific stuff. So the next one here, Blinken deletes a tweet encouraging an Israeli-Hamas ceasefire. So Secretary of State Antony Blinken deleted a tweet where he said he was encouraging efforts to push for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. So Blinken made the post on X after he spoke with Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan on Saturday. So in this now deleted tweet, Blinken said, quote, "I encouraged Turkey's advocacy for a ceasefire and the release of all hostages held by Hamas immediately," end quote. So the State Department's readout of the call did not mention a ceasefire, but said that Blinken encouraged Turkey's engagement. So anyway, put this out. Blinken came under a lot of criticism for saying that he was encouraging a ceasefire, because that's just the state of things right now. There's a lot of hysteria going on. And the State Department's U.S. Office of Palestinian Affairs also deleted a tweet calling for restraint and de-escalation. You know, the U.S. State Department does not want to be calling for those things. So that tweet said, quote, "We unequivocally condemn the attack of Hamas terrorists and the loss of life that has incurred. We urge all sides to refrain from violence and retaliatory attacks. Terror and violence solve nothing," end quote. So instead of pushing for an end to the bloodshed, similar to the situation in Ukraine, Blinken has come out. He came out explicitly against the ceasefire before Ukraine launched its counteroffensive. You know, right now it's a similar thing. The U.S. is just completely backing Israel right now, showing full support, and Congress is ready to give them billions of more dollars to, you know, wipe out Gaza, which is probably going to be the end result of this thing. All right, so the next one, we just have updates again, live updates from Middle East Eye. They keep this live blog up, and it's a good thing to go just check out if you're interested, just to see what the latest news is. The top update that they have is that the number of displaced people in Gaza exceeds 187,000. Journalists killed by Israeli strikes in Gaza. Tucker Carlson slams U.S. Republicans for warmongering. That's interesting. I have to watch that. I guess that was on his Twitter show, or X. Senior Israeli military commander killed fighting along the Lebanon border. We'll get a little more into the Lebanon situation in another story, but very concerning. You know, the idea of a second front really opening up here. But this next one is very interesting. Israel says that there's no evidence that Iran helped in the Hamas attack. So on Monday, Israeli officials said they had no evidence that Iran was involved in the Hamas attack on southern Israel after a report from the Wall Street Journal claimed that Iranian officials helped plot the operation. So that Wall Street Journal report seemed very strange. It came out Sunday, and they quoted sources in Hamas and Hezbollah saying that Iran basically gave the green light for this operation. So how is it that Israeli intelligence, U.S. intelligence missed that this was going to happen? But then you have the Wall Street Journal the next day having this huge scoop that, oh yeah, this was the plan. You know, it's just hard to believe. And, you know, it just at this time, especially right now, like we have to kind of be aware of the idea of kind of fake narratives and things, you know, especially outlets like the Wall Street Journal that are notoriously hawkish and want to push for war. And the Wall Street Journal is particularly bad on Iran. They always have been. So anyway, an Israeli Defense Forces spokesman said, quote, "We have no evidence or proof," end quote, and referring to Iranian involvement. And this was in comments to Politico. He also, you know, left the door open to Iranian responsibility, basically saying just because we don't have the evidence doesn't mean that Iran isn't behind it. And another IDF spokesman, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, made similar comments. He said, quote, "Iran is a major player, but we cannot say yet if it was involved in the planning or training," end quote. So also on Monday, Iran and Hamas denied Iranian involvement in the assault. The Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman denied that they were involved. And Ali Barakeh, he is a Hamas leader living in exile in Beirut. He said in comments to AP that only top Hamas military officials were aware of the plot before the attack was launched. He said, quote, "Only a handful of Hamas commanders knew about the 0 hour," end quote. So the Wall Street Journal report claimed that Iran gave Hamas the green light for the attack during a meeting in Beirut last week. But Barakeh said that no one from the Central Command or the Political Bureau of Hamas was in the Lebanese capital last week. He acknowledged that Iran had previously aided Hamas, but said that since the 2014 Gaza war, the group had been manufacturing its own rockets and training its own fighters. So one thing he said that was interesting is that he was surprised that the attack, which has been dubbed Operation Al-Aqsa Storm, did so much damage to Israel. He said, quote, "We were surprised by this great collapse. We were planning to make some gains and take prisoners to exchange them. This army was a paper tiger," end quote. So the Wall Street Journal claimed that Iran started helping plot the attack in August, but according to this AP report, and this is based on the conversation with this Hamas guy, this operation had been planned for over a year. And he denied speculation that it was launched to derail Israeli-Saudi normalization and said that it was a reaction to the various provocations from the government of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And I know when they first launched the assault, the statement that Hamas put out was that it was a response to the storming of Al-Aqsa Mosque recently and everything that's been going on there. So the Wall Street Journal did not get backup from Israel on this, and this signals, because if it benefits Israel, they would accuse Iran. They accuse Iran of all sorts of things. So I think this is a sign that they don't really want this thing to escalate right now. I think they just want to focus on this Gaza war, on just leveling Gaza. I think that's their focus right now. All right, so the next one, Egypt says that Israel ignored warnings that something big was coming. So an Egyptian intelligence official has said that Israel ignored warnings that something big was coming amid questions about how the Hamas attack that was launched Saturday took the Israeli government by surprise, considering Gaza is under constant Israeli surveillance, is under blockade. So this Egyptian official, who spoke on the condition of anonymity to the AP, said, quote, "We have warned them an explosion of the situation is coming and very soon, and it would be big, but they underestimated such warnings," end quote. So the official said that Israeli officials played down the threats from Gaza and focused on the West Bank, where Israel has conducted major raids since the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu came into power in December. Netanyahu's coalition includes settlers who are working to expand settlements in the West Bank. So this is according to the Times of Israel. They said that Ynet, which is an Israeli news site, they said that Ynet reported that Egypt's intelligence minister called Netanyahu just 10 days before the Hamas attack, warning that militants in Gaza were planning something unusual and something unusual and terrible. So just 10 days before, Netanyahu's denying this. Netanyahu's office dismissed these reports as fake news. What was interesting is that, again, I saw the Times of Israel report on the Ynet report that I saw earlier in the day, but then it kind of disappeared from their website, at least the English language one that I was looking at. So I just wonder if they were, forced to delete it. But Netanyahu's office response to these reports was, quote, "No early message came from Egypt, and the prime minister did not speak or meet with the intelligence chief since the establishment of the government, not indirectly or directly. This is completely fake news," end quote. All right. So the next one here. Hezbollah declares military operation against Israel. So on Monday, there was more fighting along the border. Again, one of the updates from Middle East Eye was that a senior Israeli commander was killed on the border there. And this article is from the Palestine Chronicle, and it says that Lebanon's Hezbollah announced in a statement, a copy of which was received by the Palestine Chronicle, that it will respond to the killing of 3 of its members at the hand of the Israeli occupation army on Monday morning. So in this quote, they said that they carried out attacks. So basically, on Sunday, Hezbollah launched some rockets at Israeli military targets in northern Israel and Sheba Farms, which is a disputed territory. Israel responded with some strikes on Lebanon. And then it looked like there was because there's Palestinian groups in southern Israel. There's Palestinian refugee camps. And it looked like some of them entered Israel on Monday, and there was fighting on the border. And then Israel did more strikes in Lebanon, and they killed 3 Hezbollah guys. And now Hezbollah is responding to that that's according to kind of what Hezbollah is saying and just the reports that I said. I don't know exactly what went down, but again, this is a sign that things could escalate here in the north. Right now it's not so much Hezbollah saying that they're entering the war on the side of Hamas. They're just saying that they're going after Israel for what's happened on the northern border there. All right, so the next one here, this is an article from Middle East Eye. We have a lot of stuff if you go lower on the page at antiwar.com about certain airstrikes in Gaza. There's just been a lot of stuff going on, but this was one that I just wanted to highlight about one person's story living in Gaza named Nima Abu Nada, who lived on the top floor of Palestine Tower, which is a 14-story residential building in the middle of Gaza City. In August 2022, Israel fired several rockets at the tower without warning, killing senior Palestinian Islamic Jihad commanders. Miraculously, the 49-year-old and her 2 children survived the bombing, but their home was left severely damaged and uninhabitable. 3 weeks ago, she finally returned to her home after paying about $18,000 for repairs. And on Saturday, Hamas launched this attack, and now the Palestine Tower was destroyed by Israel, and they gave warnings to people living in the tower that they were telling them to flee before the bombing began. So it looks like the tower is completely destroyed now. So it's just kind of one anecdote from somebody that lives in Gaza. All right, so the next one here, growing number of Ukrainians want diplomacy to end the war. And this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So a recent poll found that the number of Ukrainians who want to fight Russia until the end of the war has fallen to 60%. So it's still the majority of the population, according to this Gallup poll, wants the Zelensky government to keep fighting Russia even after this counteroffensive that has not been successful. But it does show that fighting until the war is won. So the question that they asked was, do you support fighting until the war is won? And 60% of the people said yes, but that is a drop from 70% last year. And the number of Ukrainians wanting to seek a diplomatic resolution has increased from 25% to 31% over the past 12 months. Still, nothing huge there, but a bit of an increase. So hopefully, I don't know. I just can't imagine any diplomacy happening anytime soon, unfortunately, but I would really like to see that war come to an end. This is the only story that I have on the Russia-Ukraine war. Everything was so focused on Israel and Gaza today. All right, the next one here. Senator Schumer lectures Xi Jinping on Israel. So Senator Chuck Schumer, who was in China on Monday, he met with China's president, Xi Jinping, and he used the meeting to lecture him about China's response to the Hamas attack on southern Israel, saying that he was disappointed with Beijing's neutrality. So Schumer told Xi, quote, "I urge you and the Chinese people to stand with the Israeli people and condemn the cowardly and vicious attacks upon them. I say this with respect, but I was disappointed by the foreign minister's statement, showing no sympathy or his support for the Israeli people during these tragedies," end quote. Earlier in the day, Schumer met with China's top diplomat, Wang Yi, and also criticized China's response to the situation in Israel and Gaza. China's foreign ministry released a statement on Sunday that urged de-escalation and peace talks, and we know the U.S. does not want anything to do with that. So the foreign ministry said in the statement, quote, "We call on relevant parties to remain calm, exercise restraint, and immediately end the hostilities to protect civilians and avoid further deterioration of the situation," end quote. So on Monday, after Schumer met with Xi, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning, she offered stronger condemnation of the killing of civilians. She said, quote, "We're deeply saddened by the civilian casualties and oppose and condemn acts that harm civilians," end quote. So Schumer took credit for that statement, which is interesting. Basically, he said, "Oh, I told China I wasn't happy with their statement, and then they, made it stronger because of me, because of what I said." But what Mao said there could be applied to both sides, because Israeli airstrikes are killing civilians in Gaza. And Mao also stressed that China was a friend to both Israel and Palestine and urged de-escalation and talks, which Beijing has offered to facilitate. So what she was saying was not really any different than what the Foreign Ministry statement was. So the idea that Chuck Schumer thinks he went over there and told the Chinese government what's what, and that they corrected their mistake, is just nonsense. They're not going to be affected by what he had to say. So Schumer's lecture overshadowed the bipartisan delegation that he led to China, the first congressional trip of its kind since 2019. So they talked about other issues, and the message was, we do not want conflict, but we want to compete with China. And this trip came, U.S.-China relations are at their lowest point in decades. So, again, this kind of overshadowed the whole thing. All right. And, it's something, if you know anything about China, they put a lot of on respect and showing, and, just going over there and lecturing them about their neutrality policy is not, it's just not going to help the state of relations. Anyway, the next one here, Kenya's High Court puts hold on deployment to Haiti. So this article is again from Kyle at the Libertarian Institute. Kenya's High Court put a temporary suspension on a planned troop deployment to Haiti. The Joe Biden administration made a deal with Nairobi to deploy its soldiers to Haiti on a mission approved by the UN Security Council. The U.S. agreed to finance the mission and to train the Kenyan soldiers. So on Friday, a former presidential candidate in Kenya filed a petition with the High Court arguing that sending troops to Haiti violated the Kenyan constitution, and the High Court granted a temporary block on sending the soldiers, and the administration of President William Ruto will have 3 days to appeal. So this could throw a wrench into the works for the U.S. plans to back this intervention in Haiti. That is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints. We have one from Ted Galen Carpenter. Washington's illegal, immoral meddling in Syria faces mounting problems. One from Jonathan Cook. The West's hypocrisy toward Gaza's breakout is stomach-turning. One from Anya Parampil. How U.S. government prosecution of Uhuru threatens a First Amendment exception. One from Kim Robinson, losing a plane, try losing a nuke. And our spotlight is interesting. It is an editorial from Haaretz, which is the Israeli newspaper, their liberal newspaper, saying that Netanyahu bears responsibility for this Israel-Gaza war. So it's another example of people in Israel, especially one of the most prominent papers, talking about the causes of this thing and not just kind of shrieking hysterically like many people seem to be doing, the hawks are doing in the U.S. But that is it. That's everything for me for today. You could always support us just by sharing the show, liking, subscribing on YouTube, or if you prefer to watch on Rumble or Odyssey. Follow me on Twitter at @ToCampDave. Oh, another thing I should mention, I was just on Russell Brand's show again. That aired on Monday. So that's on his Rumble. It was about a 45-minute conversation, so a pretty long talk that I had with him. It was mainly about Russia and Ukraine, and we also hit on China. It was recorded on Thursday, so it was before everything popped off in Israel. But go check that out. It's on his Rumble channel. But anyway, I will be back tomorrow with some more news for you. Thanks for listening.